Welcome, everybody, to Earth Day Conversations with Mayor Coral Evans, Flagstaff City Council members Austin Aslan, Charlie Odegaard, and Regina Salas, and Coconino County Supervisors Art Babbott and Matt Ryan. This event is sponsored by the Northern Arizona Climate Change Alliance, and you can find out more at their website, www.nazcca.org. This event is also co-sponsored by the Arizona Students Association, Citizens Climate Lobby, First Congregational Church of Flagstaff, the Flagstaff Quakers Friends Meeting, Earth Day Live, and the U.S. Youth Climate Strike. Part of the reason that we're having this celebration is because this Flagstaff City Council and County Board of Supervisors has done some good things for the future of Northern Arizona. On November 20th, 2018, the Flagstaff City Council passed the first Climate Action and Adaptation Plan in Arizona. The plan calls for the city municipality to be carbon neutral by 2025. It calls for the entire city to become carbon neutral by 2040. On January 28th, 2020, the mayor and all council members endorsed a declaration of climate emergency. In January 2020, the Coconino County Board of Supervisors approved the 477 megawatt Chevron Butte wind power plant south of Winslow. This will help Northern Arizona achieve its carbon neutrality goals. It will be one of many renewable energy installations that will help to replace the coal-fired power plants that are being retired. The Navajo generating station has already been decommissioned, and the Cholla power plant is closing one of its 3 generators this year.
Again, my name is Stefan Sommer, and I'm with the Northern Arizona Climate Change Alliance. My 2 co-hosts are John McCartney. Hello, John.
Hey, Stefan.
Tell us who you are.
John McCartney, buddies with Stefan, racquetball. We really miss racquetball, but I've been following climate change since I was in high school when I learned about the greenhouse effects and everything. And in semi-retirement, I'm trying to get more involved. I'm a civil engineer and a builder by trade. And we need to get busy because it needs to happen here in the next decade or so. So let's go.
And our other co-host this evening is Mehrdad Khatibi. Mehrdad, are you there?
Hey, Stefan. Yep, I'm here.
Hey, Mehrdad.
Hey, hi, everybody. Happy to be here. Happy to join you guys on Earth Day. I'm the director for the Institute for Tribal Environmental Professionals at Northern Arizona University. We work with tribes around the country on various different environmental management issues. One of our programs happens to focus on climate change. So we have staff on board that are very much engaged with tribes around the country, helping them develop adaptation management plans. And so we do a lot of trainings with tribes and others. So happy to be here. And yeah, I'll be helping Stefan with some of the questions that are going to be coming in through the Zoom chat line.
Thank you very much, Mehrdad and John. So again, for everybody who's out there, we're taking in questions from YouTube Live and from Facebook Live and through the chat here. So if you have a question for us or one of the representatives, please forward your questions through the chat box, and then we will forward them to our elected officials. This evening we have Austin Aslan with us. Say hi to everybody, Austin.
Hi to everybody, Austin. Hey, everybody out there, happy Earth Day. I'm here, I'm joined with my wife, Dr. Aslan.
Very good. And you are one of the Flagstaff City Council members, is that correct?
Oh, yes. Yes, that's right. I thought that went without saying.
Yeah, okay.
My fault.
And I believe that Matt Ryan is with us as well. Matt, are you there?
So I'm Matt Ryan, County Supervisor, and we actually represent geographical areas. So 4 of the supervisors represent portions of Flagstaff. I represent the pretty much the southwestern sections, the best part of Flagstaff, right, Austin? Over in, I have Lake Mary communities, University Heights Highlands, Equestrian Estates, Bow and Arrow, And so southwestern Flagstaff. Our districts go even further than that, though. I have Williams, Sedona, Kachina Village, Munns Park, Mountain Air, Belmont, Parks, and I'll forget somebody and they'll surely tell me about that. But a pleasure to be here and look forward to the conversation, and happy Earth Day.
We're very happy to have you here with us to celebrate. Let me introduce Charlie Odegaard next. Charlie is also a Flagstaff City Council member, one of the council members who passed the Flagstaff Climate Action and Adaptation Plan on November 20th of 2018. Charlie, welcome, and say hello to the folks.
Well, hello everyone, and happy Earth Day.
Happy Earth Day.
And Regina Salas is with us as well.
Everyone, yes.
And Regina Salas is another Flagstaff City Council member.
Let's make every day Earth Day.
Very good.
Amen.
Very good. And Art, are you with us?
Great to be here, and thanks for your help in coordinating this with a lot of help from others.
Yes, a lot has gone into this. So yeah, thank you all for being here. Mayor Quarrel Evans has just joined us. Say hi to everybody.
Hello, everyone. Happy to see you.
We're very happy to have you with us as well. So happy Earth Day.
Happy Earth Day.
Happy Earth Day.
Let me go ahead and open it up for questions. If you have questions, please put them into the chat box, and you can direct your questions either generally for any of the elected leaders, or you can state your questions specifically to one of them. We can bring those questions forward. So let me just start out while we're waiting for folks to come up with questions, and please don't hesitate. Please jump right in. I guess I'd like to ask Quarrel why Earth Day is so important, do you think? And why is it important that we have a way to gather for Earth Day?
Well, first of all, I would like to say thank you for everybody who is tuning in, who's listening to us on YouTube or live, or however we're doing this. I see several members of my council that's also here with me. I think what's important about Earth Day is the fact that we are taking time out to celebrate really why we're all here. Were it not be for the Earth, none of us would be here. There's only one planet Earth. Also, it's important to stop and acknowledge what we need to do to make sure that we maintain a place for all future generations. As a third generation daughter of Arizona, I can tell you that I'm sitting here in a house that my grandfather built in 1942, mindful of the fact that as a third generation Arizonan, I'm still kind of new, right? There are people who have been here on this land for 500 plus years. And so we spend time acknowledging important things, weddings, birthdays, anniversaries, and definitely stopping to acknowledge Mother Earth is extremely critical. I was on a call earlier today. I see Supervisor Babbott. I saw him a minute ago. He's here as well, where someone said, you know, we ought to be, there he is. Someone said we really ought to be mindful 365 days a year. We really need to be paying attention and being very purposeful in what we are doing. And so I'm just excited to be here with you today. There's an old adage that says, an African proverb that says, if you want to go fast, you should go alone. If you want to go far, you need to go together. And so having a way for us all to be here together, be it virtually, but in celebration and solidarity of the fact that our Earth is extremely critical, most important, and we are all tied to it and connected to it, is important. So thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Evans. I don't know if any of the other elected leaders would like to make the comment about Earth Day at all, but please feel free to. Art, are you with us?
So I'll just follow up just quickly. You know, we don't get, in almost any system that we operate in, an economic system, an ecological system, a social system, you know, we don't get to keep what we have without stewardship, without kind of cultivating a commitment of responsibility. And that is absolutely appropriate and relational to the biosphere that we have the privilege of walking on here. And so to me, it is that active acknowledgement that we have a stewardship obligation, that we have a responsibility to come to the table with a willingness to engage that allows us on some level to keep what we have, build a resilient future in the while facing the intensity of the climate crisis that we're in, and also to do it in partnership, as the mayor just referenced. So really happy to be here.
Very good. Austin, are you with us?
Great. So Earth Day is really important. You know, there's a couple things I'd like to mention. You know, every day should be Earth Day. And this is something a lot of us have said, and it's cliche, also very true. But I think set a day aside specifically to celebrate our planet is really important, because as humans, you know, we're creatures of habit, and getting out of our personal patterns once a year to specifically rally around this cause in particular, globally and locally, provides us with a needed boost of energy. You know, I'm not quite 50 years old myself, so I don't remember the first Earth Day. But I have looked back on the history of Earth Day a little bit, and really encouraging to me about this mission is that when it began, it was entirely nonpartisan, and it should continue to be that way to this day. But our first Earth Days were organized in large part by a group of bipartisan lawmakers and legislators from all over the place. And out of those first Earth Days came things like the Clean Water and Clean Air Act, the Endangered Species Act.
I think we're losing you, Austin. So we have some specific questions that are coming through in the chat. Let me go ahead and forward some of these. Merdad?
So I guess the question is, has there been any kind of impact to implementation of the climate action plan that Flagstaff has based on the COVID-19 pandemic, or their perceived impacts maybe going into the future?
So I'd be more than happy to speak to some of that. So first of all, I would say that the biggest thing that we have seen is the fact that the community came to us and asked us. We had a very robust conversation about declaring a climate emergency. And that was scheduled to go forward, and the council was scheduled to have that conversation. Then all of a sudden we couldn't have in-person meetings, and we've been meeting remotely. Because it's such an important topic, and because we had something like 4 hours of the conversation and people really wanted to be there for it, at this time we have not moved forward with that resolution. We are waiting until we can have an in-person meeting in order to move that project forward, or to move that proclamation forward. So that's been one thing that has been noticeable. Some other things that have happened would be the fact that our Flagstaff Youth Climate Summit has been postponed. This was going to be a collaborative event with the Arboretum at Flagstaff and the Willow Bend Environmental Education Center, and it had 3 different challenges. One of them had to do with the Climate Action Challenge, and as well as the Kid Win Challenge. And so that's obviously been put on hold because it's so hands intensive and person intensive. We've also had to move our climate and coffee, our coffee and climate meetings to the virtual realm. So we are now doing those much like we're doing this, and not in person. So those have been some things that have been noticeable. But everything else that we can do, from our desk and at home, our sustainability department has been working very diligently on that here in the city of Flagstaff. I believe that most of you know that the sustainability department has been moved up out of the middle sort of section of our organization, and is now housed in the city manager's office as a way to make sure that we can make sure that we are moving forward in implementing our climate action and adaptation plan in a meaningful way. I do want to say that moving forward, tomorrow we start our budget discussions. We start our budget discussions tomorrow, and this is going to be a very hard budget discussion. We are looking at the fact that we are most likely in a recession, and we are going to have to make sure that we can keep the organization afloat and moving forward. So there may be some things that get tabled. There may be some things that get cut back. But I can tell you that council is definitely committed to moving forward. It might not be we move forward in quick a manner as we want it to. But some of the things that I have seen as an individual when it comes to the COVID-19 challenge that we're in now is that we may be able to meet some of our goals by rethinking about what we've been doing. Most of us have not driven our car in a month. Maybe we don't actually need to drive our car. We haven't necessarily gone to meetings. Maybe we can continue meetings like this. You know, a lot of our staff members are working at home. When this is over with, maybe they need to continue to work at home. You know, maybe we need to look at a reduction, not a reduction in force, but a reduction of people who have to be in City Hall, using utilities, parking their cars, and driving there. So I think that within all of this, there is a lot of stuff that we can do that will help forward our climate action adaptation plan that may not cost us the money that we thought it was originally. So those are just some of my thoughts.
Excellent. Anybody else? Matt or Austin or Regina or Art?
So this is Matt Ryan speaking. Yes and no. A lot of things have been alternated or affected with COVID-19. By the same token, I could tell you our permits for building are just still cranking out there. So, you know, it depends upon you know, which piece we're looking at as far as the impact of COVID-19. But other efforts that are going on, NAPTA, you know, others are current representatives. I'm an alternate. We shift in and out on those positions on these boards, but they're looking at a zero emissions bus to see how they can even enhance the hybrid electric that the Flagstaff voters put in. In the meantime, other efforts that we have going is we have an alternative technology advisory group, ATAG. They advise coming in for these building projects that we do to help people understand what they might do to improve their alternative approaches to energy on their buildings. So now it's still a challenge to meet remotely. Our Planning and Zoning Commission meets remotely. They developed a process immediately so that they continue to do business as usual. For that, as Quarrel noted, we at the county, we've closed a number of our buildings in a couple different ways. One is we've concentrated staff. Most people are working remotely, but everybody still needs access to public services. So we have people responding. We also have buzzer systems to get into the buildings if that is a necessary step that needs to take place, or contact information associated with it. We also have been advised that it takes about 3 days for the virus to die, and so we do virtual Fridays. Nobody is permitted in any of the buildings on the county campus, and that allows for a different way of cleansing the building. So has it alternated or affected our lives? Absolutely, for what we need to do.
Very good. Thank you. Charlie, are you out there?
Thank you, Stefan, very much. What's going to be an important step for the City of Flagstaff organization is actually concerning our meeting that we're having tomorrow during our budget discussions. And for a 3-hour session tomorrow morning is going to talk about our unfunded pension liability. The unfunded pension liability for the City of Flagstaff right now is about $112 million. And that grows every year. And it takes a big chunk out of our budget every single year. And right now we're almost at $10 million in our budget that unfunded pension liability takes. So we're going to have a discussion tomorrow and talk about an opportunity to take care of that unfunded pension liability, where we'll be at 100% funded rate. So that will do is free up dollars in the future out of our general budget to do things that the community wants us to do things. Communities talked about parks, it talks about the climate action adaptation plan, to get on a roadmap that's a robust one that the community would like to see. And so if we can take care of that unfunded pension liability after tomorrow's discussions and have a plan that we'll approve by June before we go on summer break, that will at least put that behind us. And then we can talk about some things that we would like to do as a community. And so that will really be our crux, whether we are going to go forward and move our cap in a meaningful way. Yes, we're doing the low-hanging fruit right now. Yesterday, we just approved a grant that we received from the governor's office for an electric bike for the Flagstaff Police Department. You know, those are some of those other simple things that we're going to move some of our vehicles off of carbon vehicles to more of an alternative form of transportation for our organization, especially our police department and some other entities in our organization. And so I'm looking forward to those discussions tomorrow. It's going to be very lengthy. Like I said, it's going to be a 3-hour period tomorrow morning for those discussions. And I'm hoping that with what I've read so far from our agenda packet for tomorrow, it looks very promising that it will put us on a map. It'll put that behind us and be able to free up dollars for future use in the future of things that the community wants to do. So thank you.
Thank you, Charlie. Here's a question from Eric Nolan. Where are we at with transitioning energy power plants to more renewable sources in Northern Arizona? Would any of you like to take that one on?
Stefan, I'd like to address the previous question, actually, if I can still.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
I realize I got cut off there at some point earlier. I apologize for that. I'm not sure when exactly that happened. But I wanted to share with you guys in terms of, you know, how is COVID-19 affecting the landscape as we move forward? And, you know, focusing my comments as a city, I think makes sense because that's really the only thing that I can personally weigh in on. But I did want to take it out to a slightly larger bird's eye view here. Recently, President Obama tweeted something that I'd like to share with all of you. He said just a couple days ago, "We've seen all too terribly the consequences of those who denied warnings of a pandemic. We can't afford any more consequences of climate denial. All of us, especially young people, have to demand better of our government at every level." And Obama goes on to say that everyone needs to step up and vote. But I think his core message is pretty clear and pretty important. You know, we're entering a challenging economic time for sure, and it's going to create a lot of different constraints on our budget, and it's going to mean we have tougher choices to make. But I firmly believe that we cannot move climate action to the back burner in terms of our budgetary decisions. A budget really is a moral document. It sort of represents in the clearest terms possible what are the priorities and the values of an organization. And regardless of COVID-19 and all the challenges that that's going to pose for us moving forward, and those challenges are very real. You know, I believe I was put on council to advocate for climate action and adaptation. I believe I was put on council to have that voice at the budgetary table to make sure that we're not falling into something that I've personally termed climate fatigue, where we talk a good talk about what needs to be done, and then when the dollars need to be assigned, we start to get a little bit wishy-washy. So that's how I see personally my role moving forward, is just being one of those anchors at the table that is making sure that we don't move climate adaptation and action to the backwaters. We have an opportunity to reset some of our patterns and our behaviors. With all that's going on, as Mayor Evans mentioned, you know, we're not driving as much anymore, and we're learning how to work remotely. And these are opportunities that we can leverage as we launch forward into a totally new paradigm. How are we continuing to decrease our carbon footprints individually and collectively? How are we valuing the fact that our air is cleaner and that, there are dolphins in the Venetian canals now? And you can see the Himalayas from New Delhi for the first time in 50 years. These are sudden silver linings and benefits that we're getting from this global catastrophe. And it would be a real shame for us not to sort of seize this moment to continue down the road in a slightly new direction. I don't think we should completely revert back to the way things were a month ago. I think we have an opportunity to take a new path. And I can talk more on policy terms, but I feel like I've taken up a few minutes here, and I want to take a breather and make sure other folks have space to talk to as well. So,
thank you, Austin, and we were glad that you were flowing that time. But let me ask that question to all of you. How are we doing in terms of converting to non-carbon power plants? I know that you guys have made some progress in a number of different areas, Red Gap Ranch, Chevron Butte. Tell us about it.
I'll hop in real quick. This is Matt Ryan. Fortunately, we've had proposals come forward. First of all, we have the comprehensive plan that's friendly to alternative energy, which is dearly needed. You also need proposals that would come forward. We have movement with the Chevron Butte wind farm. We also had it with Nextera on the Perrin Ranch. And actually, prior to that, we approved the Sunshine Wind Farm out close to where Red Gap Ranch is currently. Unfortunately, the climate has been lukewarm, almost cold with the Corporation Commission in terms of providing opportunities for alternative energy. Bless our hearts, APS is going to move towards net zero by 2050, but they've been a barrier, quite frankly, when it comes to fighting for the Corporation Commission to enable alternative energy. Now they're making a statement that they want to move in that direction, and that's a key piece. They're one of our primary energy providers, or those that you have components of transmission. That is a key piece related to where these wind farms go. And then we also have a friendly environment, at least in our comp plan, for solar farms. And, there were rumors that we might get a big one coming forward soon. We hope that we would, but these are outside investments also. We've provided tools through our plans, and just like the Climate Action Plan with the City of Flagstaff, you have to have the plan so that those that want to come forward, it can be enabled, and then the investment behind it, and then reduction of regulatory barriers is a component associated with that. But with NGS going down with these coal-fired plants that, on the carbon side, they've been a challenge. It's a step in the right direction, but we need much more than what we have currently. I'll defer the floor to others.
Well, if there are no other comments about the wind power plants at Red Gap Ranch, at Chevron Butte, the Chevron Butte is 477 megawatts. So that will supply a pretty good chunk of what we need in Flagstaff, and more such kind of installations will help us in Northern Arizona. One of the questions that came in a little earlier was about how is that going to affect the cost of electricity per kilowatt hour? And my understanding in looking at all the numbers is that wind and solar are now not just cost competitive, but they are out producing. They're costing less than every kind of fossil fuel generation of electricity. Anybody else want to comment on that? I guess I kind of answered my own question. Merdad, are you seeing any good questions out there that you want to bring forward?
Yeah, Stefan, there's one here. So the question is, how about broadband as a public utility? Anybody care to take that on?
Well, I can just briefly share my perspective on this. I feel we're straying a little bit away from the climate theme of our gathering, but I think public broadband is an absolute right for our citizens. I said as much in a letter to the editor just a week ago in the Daily Sun. But you know, the digital divide is real and it's problematic, and it's a social justice issue, and it's in full, I mean, we can see that playing out right now. We're going to have students falling behind because they're literally not in the classroom that everyone else is in right now. And so, you know, that's one of those things that we need to take care of very quickly, very efficiently.
Does the city council have any kind of a role or could support that effort?
I'm not familiar with the logistical ins and outs of that, but it seems to me that that's, you know, the Arizona Corporation Commission has a large role to play in that. You know, and with respect to that, I'm one of the voices on council advocating that as a city, we open up a lobbying arm officially with our intergovernmental folks to regularly be in touch with the ACC in the same way that we're regularly in touch with the Arizona legislature and the our U.S. government apparatus as well on an ongoing basis. I think that's something that we need to step up, and you know, we need to be in a position where we can actively in real time be breathing down the ACC's neck, so to speak, just to make sure that as we're partnering together, we're on good terms, and that we're moving in sync, and that we have shared values that we're pursuing.
I want to add a
Thanks,
little
Austin.
to the broadband conversation. Definitely, Council Member Aslan added a lot to what's going on and a very specific perception that is correct. The city of Flagstaff has a proclamation, and we were pretty clear that we feel that the entire city should have access to broadband and access to the internet, because it is a social justice issue, it's an economic issue, it's an education issue. So prior to COVID-19, all of our public facilities have free Wi-Fi and free internet for the community to go in and take a part of. We did that as being the first STEM city in the United States. It was part of that proclamation. Unfortunately, right now, we are seeing what happens when you close public facilities because it's dangerous for people to go in, and the fact that people need to have access outside of being delivered through a government facility. I know that there's a plan that has APS using their routes, their poles, so to speak, coming up through the Verde, as well as in the White Mountains area, to install internet, install the ability for people to tap in and get internet that way. But there's still also the cost of internet, right? And the fact that not everybody has $60 a month to have a high-speed internet. So it is a definite issue, and it's something that really the ACC needs to look into. A lot of these questions that I see in the chat box that has to do with how we're using energy, where energy comes from, what type of energy we're using, and quite frankly, the rates of energy all lead back to the same source. So I want to just echo what Mr. Aslan said when he said, you know, voting is important. And who we vote for is important, and we need to be very deliberate when we cast our vote.
So, you know, we've been talking about some drill down specific things and some bigger picture things. I think you have to concentrate on both of them. Transportation is a huge part of the carbon budget, and that comes into play with, you know, moving food around, moving people around, all kinds of goods. And I know I've been going into Sam's Club and buying for a while blueberries from Chile, and I'm thinking, wow, okay, we can't have the planes anymore because the carbon footprint is tremendously huge. And so if we're moving away from planes, we're kind of a crossroads here. We're having to build things and grow things closer, and needing to transport those things in a low carbon environment. It seems to me that we're going to be running things on electricity, and we're going to be needing to look forward and planning forward into the future for, the methods for transporting goods. And I know Matt has some ideas has been to many of these planning meetings for transportation, but I'm thinking we should be planning for transportation now.
John, I'm struggling to understand your question, so just nail it in a one sentence question.
Transportation, how do we plan for the future?
This is Matt Ryan speaking. When you did the interviews, I went into it a little bit, but again, I make the statement, I'm an incrementalist. To get society to change, sometimes dramatic changes happen, but more often you have to work with community tolerance with that. Flagstaff's on its way to incorporating additional modes of transportation, but it's costly. And so when you're dealing with larger infrastructure, especially that which you're inherited, and Milton Avenue is a great example, it's hard to build a rapid transit lane, and it's hard to build in the other modes of transportation. And so you get caught in gridlock because you don't have that rapid transit that can get through, and you depend upon frequency to move travelers. And then another element is you need a level of density to carry a transit system. And with that, you can concentrate your commerce to smaller populations or smaller geographic areas with larger populations, I should say. So there are various elements. Right now, we're having a lot of changes rapidly into automation, into either hybrid or strictly electric transportation. And so building it into our own fleets, providing the opportunity for people for charging stations, for instance, building it into your plans that can enable those that move forward with their projects is a key element. You always want to build it into your plans, and I think Flagstaff is doing well there. County is a little different, where we have lower densities, but can you have park and rides that you start to develop? You got to get buy-in from the community to start to build it incrementally. Transit piece, an efficient small model that start with workforce, build up upon that with more and more people parking and riding in an efficient vehicle. It reduces the amount of transportation within the city and congestion as well. So there are various levels that we're beginning to work on, depending upon which organization or which communities. But you have to hit a certain threshold associated with that. And it's hard when you are rural in certain ways, just for the amount of investment that you need to make these happen. So that's a first piece of it. There are many answers beyond that, but I don't want to consume conversation for the sake of fellow council members and Art, if he's still out there. I don't think he is, but he might be.
I think Art had to leave us after the first 40 minutes. Anybody else on that question?
I'd like to weigh in on that one just a little bit, and say to the individual, I can't remember which box who spoke, but the idea that we need to be planning now is critical. If we want to have a high-speed train, this conversation came up earlier today between the city of Flagstaff, Phoenix and Tucson. Now would be the time to be planning that. One of the things that's very interesting and what you're seeing happening now with the transportation projects that you currently see, those have been 20 years in the making. Literally 20 years
costs a lot.
Making. They cost a lot of money. People don't necessarily want to fund those types of projects. And so, for example, the road, Milton Road, we talk about it like it's a city road. It's actually a state highway. Same thing with Humphreys, as well as Fort Valley, Highway 180, Highway 89. The city of Flagstaff itself really doesn't have a road across town. We have Butler. That's our road. And so when you look at the roads that we talk about, one, they're not our roads. Number two, if we really want to move transportation correctly, we might want to build our own roads. And then when you look at the cost to build things, we tend to kick the can down the road So it takes 20 years to do an infrastructure project. The Rio de Flag is a good example of that. The bridge over I-40, Councilmember Odegaard could talk more about that, but the widening of 4th Street over that bridge. So there's those issues that we see. And so not only is it about planning, but we also need to put the dollars toward it to get it done in a way that it's meaningful and can actually do some of the things we want to see it do.
Thank you.
There's a question here from Joey Bono to the council members. And it's, what are each member's stance on mandating renewable energy on all multifamily housing developers moving forward? This relates to two things. It relates to, it's a question about the goal of reaching net zero by 2040, and generally, what are y'all doing with regard to improving building code? Anybody?
I can kick it off. And I'm sure that other council members want to weigh in. First and foremost, I can't give you an answer to the question that you're asking because I really don't know what the impact is. I don't know what that looks like. I don't know what the impact is to the bottom line of housing. And I'm not sure if it's something that we as a council should try to incentivize, or is it something that we should try to mandate? So I can't answer that question. I saw it. I need more information on it. We as a council are doing a lot to address the issue through our building codes. We just did changes to our building codes on Tuesday to try to make things better and to try to assist with that. Something that we did not long ago was mandate electric plugs for electric cars and those types of things in our building code. And again, I really think when it comes to what we're building, I see less of an emphasis on actually having us go in and incentivize older houses to be brought up to the newer standards. We talk a lot about building new, and my whole thing is I think the most sustainable house is one that's already built. And for example, I live in a house that was built in 1942. My entire family has always lived in this house. We have not lived in a different house, right? And so for one while, we had 4 generations living here in this house. And so I look at what can we do as a city to incentivize that type of behavior? What can we do to incentivize the little cottages that are in the back, or the little converted garage that allows for a little apartment? Those are the types of things I think we need to talk about. I also think that sometimes when we want to mandate it, what happens is that we end up creating that continued rift. We end up creating a higher cost, and we end up, quite frankly, outpricing people who live in our community, which is why I say that might be a great idea, and I'm sure it is, but is it something that we as a community should incentivize? Is it something that we should say, we want to see it and we think it's extremely valuable, so we want to actually incentivize it? That means put our own dollars toward it to make sure that it happens, to make sure that we get the result that we want. So those are just random thoughts, but anybody's free to disagree with me. And I see other members of council. And again, I'm just one person.
Mayor, I'll just add, I think what you had to say was a nice overview of a very broad-ranging and deep topic. I would just add that I think we're struggling with this as a city. Is our goal 100% renewable energy, or is our goal 100% carbon neutrality? And those aren't exactly the same thing. Those are different things. And I think we have an appetite as a city to actually, bump it up a little bit and make sure that we're looking at carbon neutrality. And just to throw it out there, I don't want to get into this, but I do want to just place it out there on the table for everybody to look at. That could include nuclear. So there's a lot of different ways to look at this issue of getting our carbon footprint down to zero, and the answer isn't always wind and solar.
Wow, that brought Charlie's face up on the screen. Did you see that? Oh, all of a sudden, all of council is here and ready to talk.
Yeah, I'd like to follow up with what the mayor was saying. Is talk about reducing our carbon footprint. We as a community has prioritized water conservation, and we do offer incentives to our residents, whether it's residential or even commercial, about reducing their water use. And I could see that concerning the carbon footprint here in the community, where we as a city bring dollars and partner with that either residential or that commercial person, and help figure out ways to reduce their carbon footprint, whether it's installing solar panels or other things that can do that, to get to the goal of we as a community reducing our carbon footprint, especially, during that emergency climate declaration, we talked about even reducing the organization footprint by 2030 to be carbon neutral, which is fairly ambitious. I also like to weigh in concerning transportation, in that when I did a business listening tour for the last couple of years for different segments of our community, especially those in manufacturing, they were talking about we don't have a robust rail spur for goods to load and unload. And so that was one thing that was suggested to the council body. I was on that tour. Councilmember McCarthy, Councilmember Salas was on those tours, and also the Vice Mayor Shimoni. Talk about, what are things that we as a city can do to help our business community, especially those that have manufacturing capability here in the community. And one of those suggestions going back was that spur line. We have a spur line, but it's not a robust spur line where we can really unload and load material efficiently. So that was a suggestion. And I know the mayor and Councilmember Aslan has built a great relationship with BNSF this past year, because we've had to have a real good relationship concerning the rail to flag flood control project. And so we brought on BNSF, and they're great partners. Everything's working really good. And then as we move past maybe the rail to flag flood control project, maybe we can talk about the spur line that we really need, especially to bring goods out of the community in a more of efficient manner, instead of whether it's by truck or air. And then going back to Councilmember Aslan's point about the ACC down there in Phoenix, I really believe that we need to build relationships with that body, as Councilmember Aslan has pointed out. When we have good relationships with another governmental body, as they, we're elected, they're elected. Also, usually at the end of the day, for the most part, we're all kind of on the same page what we want, whether it's for a community or for a state. And with building relationships and building that dialogue and that communication with two agencies, we can get where we both want to be. I know there was sometimes a little hiccup with ACC at times, like the Cholla plant, whether to convert it to biomass project. It was a split vote at the ACC last year, so it was 3-2, and it could have went either way. There was people on both sides of the aisle that was pretty upset with that decision of not moving forward, at least looking to see if it's a viable option of creating a biomass plant out there by Joe City. So I think it's one's building those communications and having the effort. I really appreciate Councilmember Aslan's wanting to do that, and we just need to do it, whether it's us as electeds, whether it's those in the community. We need to show up and speak. Everybody has an opportunity to speak during a 3-minute public participation. And so we need to take advantage of those. So thank you.
Can I just add a finer point to something? Because there is a comment that I think should be, responded to. It does take 20 years to do these transportation projects. And, it could be that the projects are 20 years behind the time. I think when you look at Milton and you see the backup that we have on Milton, there's at least 20 years worth of traffic that has never been addressed, which is why Milton is that way. There's a reason why you see the town backing up at certain points and certain stress points and things like that. And so I just want to acknowledge, you're right, that these projects are 20 years behind the time. What we need is a way to look out into the future and really plan like what it's going to be. And then we need to implement that now. So when we get to the future, we actually have that in place. We shouldn't be talking about how to fix Milton in 2020. Milton should have been fixed in the 80s. Milton was I grew up here. Milton has always been a problem, and it's gotten to be worse over the last 10 years. So, but I do want to recognize you are 100% right.
Thank you, Coral. I've got a question, I guess, about the nuclear. The numbers I've seen for nuclear show pretty clearly that nuclear costs about 3 times as much as solar or wind, and a good bit more than any of the fossil fuels per kilowatt hour. So I'm not sure that really that's the best economic direction we'd want to go. I think the current plans for the wind power plant and the solar power plants are much more cost effective. I guess that was more of a comment than a question.
and quite a bit safer.
Yeah. Well, you know, a piece of the discussion, just to broaden it a little bit, is what we're each doing locally. You know, are you harvesting water and using it on your vegetation? Is one. A 55 gallon drum it's a good step, but it's kind of boutique also. It's there's a lot of water that comes off the roof in a downpour in the summertime, or runoff in the wintertime as it melts down. You know, we have, each one of us has a responsibility of looking at what we're doing, and we all cross a level of hypocrisy. You know, we're all driving our vehicle, if we have one. You know, where is the point that we're each taking our own step personally, and opting to, if you can use a multimodal opportunity, when do you hop on the bus or ride your bicycle or walk instead? Can you do a little bit more? It's Earth Day, you know, think about these things. Go out and look at your property, if you have a property, and can you harvest water? Can you reduce the amount of electricity you're using? Have you considered just looking at investment opportunities, if you can, to put some solar on your roof, just to cut down a little bit on your electric use that comes from other generation modes or methodologies. So, you know, these are various aspects. You know, the transportation piece that Charlie was talking about, we, you know, with Flagstaff Metropolitan Planning Organization, we brought in consultants to look at the time intermodal, which was, you know, these container vessels, bringing containers, visited Long Beach, visited San Pedro Point out in LA, you know, looked at a lot of the rail opportunities. A challenge is, you know, to get a Class 1 railroad to pull a train off the tracks in a specific town, usually you need a whole train for it to be financially viable. Now they're starting to shift. They have a different unit. Before, each Class 1 would control their cars. They get them all back east, and then they get stuck there. So they have an intermediary that comes in, and it actually is controlling and organizing and helping each Class 1 get their trains back, but they've built in a better logistic associated with it. The other one's short line. You can see that happening over in Kingman. They've been very successful and along the river there and using short line. But for our own economics within Flagstaff region, just what Charlie was talking about, that it's gone from intermodal to transmodal. Intermodal is just the containers, the things that you see stacked. Transmodal provides the opportunity for either container or to go ahead and get trucks on and off and make it efficient. And that fits better with our merchants at a smaller scale in the area. So you have to build a certain economic threshold that you can do it, but absolutely, train's much more efficient as far as use of fuel. It's how does it get built into your own economics? And then what is our food generation capability at the local level? Are you planting your gardens, or you know, I just wanted to throw to my fellow council members, since you know, they would have to implement it. Don't you love it when somebody steps in your jurisdiction and tells you what to do? But my gosh, Red Gap Ranch, you have all that water out there. We did a study in the Verde Valley before they went into viticulture with Verde Valley Forum. And if you look at the elevation Red Rock Ranch is in a primo place for hydroponics. So you have the ability, but there's an investment associated with it. It's not going to be structured. You have to figure out the structure associated with it. Since we're dreaming, it's Earth Day, it's just an idea to throw out there. So I've talked long enough on this. I need to give other council members a chance to speak.
Austin, I'm not sure how you're getting muted, but I managed to unmute you again.
Yeah, well, I mute myself. I've got 2 kids running around in the background.
Okay, sorry.
So I need to keep it quiet when I'm, I just wanted to mention, there's some comments over on the comment section here about nuclear. Stefan, you mentioned something too. I'm not trying to advocate for nuclear as a go-it-alone approach. I just wanted to throw that out there. Part of what I like to do is create tension. And I think when you come up with innovative solutions to problems and you start looking in new directions, that's always going to involve some uncomfortable conversations. And the fact remains that nuclear is one of the cleanest types of energy we can produce. Maybe it's not the cheapest. It's certainly not the most local, and it's not the one we can have most control over. But I don't question the safety of nuclear too much. And I do think that it's, just one of those options on the table that we need to consider and talk about. And again, not advocating for it, just trying to create some tension out there and remind everyone that this has been a messy process. It's always going to be a messy process. And there's a lot of tools in our tool chest that we can look to. There's also some downsides to renewables as well. When you think of wind farms and issues with birds and also just the viewscape with solar and wind power, you're developing what used to be wilderness in some cases, there's a whole host of issues that we could jump into, and there's always going to be costs and intangibles associated with any choices that we make. One of the comments came up with, biomass. I haven't heard us talking too much about that. I think that's promising. If we're going to be cutting down our trees on a regular basis in order to keep our forests safe, it'd be really nice to be able to use that material and gain energy from it. There's a cost associated with that. And also there's other intangibles, right? It's problematic how we transport all of that stuff, where we process it. There's a lot of interest groups that are concerned about air quality when it comes to that, including our Naval Observatory and Lowell and our astronomy programs up here. And so I'll just leave that at that. One thing I wanted to add to the conversation about transportation is just to pay service to, there's a side to this equation where adding more car lanes doesn't equal a reduction in traffic. It just may facilitate more cars on the road. And so there's a lot of tension around that as well. Multimodal and getting people out of cars and getting people to change their behaviors is an integral component to changing our transportation equation and the carbon footprint associated with it. But there's a point where reality hits, as well. We have cold winters here. We have an older population that's very hilly. It's unreasonable to expect everyone to just stop driving and start biking everywhere, especially at certain times of the year and certain times of day. So, these things have to come with an approach, a holistic approach, and with, paying service to the folks who are never going to be on a bicycle and can't use that type of transportation. So I don't think more roads is necessarily the answer to all of our problems in terms of traffic. But just this year, earlier this year, and 2020 isn't that old, I did introduce to council a fair item to start looking at carbon offsets as a way to approach our transportation future. And I want that conversation to be as broad as possible, because I think the solutions can come from multiple directions. But when we start looking at our transportation, we have our cars, and we have our trains, and we have our airport. You know, there's a lot more enplanements at the Flagstaff Airport these days than ever before. That's fantastic. I am very, very pleased with the convenience of traveling outside of Flagstaff these days, but that comes with a cost. And when you look at the elephant in the room, and you do, and you measure, you know, how transportation, carbon, that equation, we're going to see that our new airport habits are creating a lot of the new carbon issues that we need to address. And so I'm hoping that we can have an honest and deliberative conversation about what it looks like to offset our carbon usage in terms of transportation in this town. And that's not just about the airport, it's about car use and all the other ways that we transport ourselves and our goods and services.
Thank you, Austin. One of the specific aspects of Eric Nielsen's question there about biomass energy was, you know, NAU has been pushing for and exploring different ways to do that. How might the city and the county work together to help that move forward? And both city and council folks can join in, I guess, as Board of Supervisors folks.
Biomass, oh my gosh. Well, we haven't wandered into the forest discussion yet in what's going on. And I know there is a desire to have the biomass plant at NAU. We were also trying to look at it, and we had a study done at Camp Navajo to take a look at it. You know, the real trick is, you know, how it costs money, for one. The other is, how is the plant developed? Are you using all forms of energy that come off of the biomass itself that's generated? We have a lot of national forests in the area, so we have the potential. It is a bottleneck right now. If we had the magic solution immediately, we would be there. You know, what I have to say is absolutely we need to try and work on that, and maybe it is the solution on the NAU campus, if not further out into the forest. Hauling wood is a whole other, you know, piece you get into on what do we do with the forest material. The more you have to haul it, the more difficult it is to eliminate it. You see, you know, Forest Service, most efficient means right now for biomass is just to burn it, but then, you know, we're, you know, filling up the skies with smoke, and that's a challenge for the communities. We've, in our flood control district on a smaller scale, sure, we've brought in an air curtain burner. We're trying to experiment with that. We tried it out in Fort Valley to work with that, and compare that to the cost of just letting it up in Forest Service's limited budgets. It's not currently the most efficient tool. And yet, if we swung around and brought it into the communities where we could use some thinning and do it, maybe we can use the air curtain burner to reduce the fire danger and work with that. That's just burning it up, though. It's not turning it into energy, which you would hope to do with a biomass plant. So I don't have the immediate answer on biomass. Are we exploring those questions and seeing what we can do? Absolutely. The reason that the biomass plant got rejected out by Camp Navajo was more from a coordination with the military. We did the joint land use study and the observatories for the Naval Observatory, both the interferometer down in on Anderson Mesa, as well as the Naval Observatory just west of town. It's really important for the Navy that these guys are protected. It wouldn't be good to have an energy plant. They're not only looking at light, but they're also looking at various forms of energy, and heat is one of those forms. So the proximity was a problem associated with it. That could also be a question for the NAU biomass plant. Is it too close to the Naval Observatory or both facilities or not. So it sounds like I'm rambling. We are exploring these questions and trying to find a place where it might make sense. Maybe it's out in Winslow that doesn't affect these installations. I should let others speak though.
Another big part of our footprint has to do with consumption. Are there ways in which the city is looking at consumption and use of materials within northern Arizona? Are there ways to move us forward to use less?
So I'll go ahead and start with that conversation. I would say yes, and that's part of the cap, right? That is within the cap. How do we reuse? There's a huge conversation that's happening right now around recyclables. What is recyclable? What we're going to do with our recyclables. We have a program that we initiated that has to do with innovative ways to recycle things that are currently not recyclable. So that was part of the Broken Sleds and that company, I can't remember the name offhand, that came out of that. But I also want to say, there you go. But I also think I think it's important for us to realize something as individuals. You know, government can only do so much. We can mandate, we can incentivize, we can suggest, we can beg, we can ticket. But it really comes down to individuals and what we think about our environment and what we think about consumption. A good example is individuals who got the $1,200 check. Not everybody got that. I didn't get that. But, the people I talked to, they were talking about the fact that Walmart was packed this weekend of people buying stuff and not necessarily food and other things that might be considered as needs, right? I also think when we talk about this whole discussion, I'm looking at the side bar conversation, I'm listening to this discussion. We have not talked about the intersection of privilege and class and poverty and equity in any of these conversations that we're having. I see that there's a comment about, I have an electric car. And I was thinking, my car has over 250,000 miles on it. I don't have a new car. I don't have the ability to buy a new car. A lot of people are taking the bus, at least where I live, because they don't have cars and that's their only form of transportation. I can tell you growing up here in this house, we had a urban farm going on in the back. It wasn't because it was a new thing to do. It was because we used it to eat and that's the only way we could. We were raising, people down the street were raising chickens, things like that. I talked about living in an old house. I can't afford to buy a new house. It's probably why I still live in this old one. So I think that part of this whole conversation, we need to really pull in, especially when we're talking about consuming, for lack of a better word. It might be that some people have the money to buy something that lasts longer. Other people are buying things that are more consumable in nature or more throwaway in nature because that's the only thing they have access to. It might be that some people are eating certain foods. I know that there are certain foods that are very specific to my ethnic background, and we eat those foods. There's a long legacy of slavery that comes with some of the foods that we eat, right? And then I was on a call earlier today with Jamesita Peshakai, and she talked about the fact that there are places on the reservation that don't have running water. They never had running water. And that's one of the reasons why that we see a huge issue with COVID-19 on the res right now. We talked about broadband. They ain't got broadband there. They having problems with that there too. So I just want to kind of put that in perspective as I kind of listen to the conversation and I see some of the comments, is that I think that, and even when it comes to climate change and climate refugees and the fact that people are running up to Flagstaff, what they're doing is they're displacing people that have been here for generations and they're making things more expensive. And even some of the ideas, because there was someone that says we should mandate this. I'm like, my first thought goes to, can someone like me who has been here for 3 generations, can I afford to buy a house? Can I afford to buy a car? Can I afford to get on the bus? Can I afford any of this stuff? And so I just want to make sure that we're remembering that we are here today on this computer having this conversation about the earth, and we are privileged to be here. There's a lot of people that do not have the privilege to be here, and their voices are not here at the table, and they are individuals that each and every day, quite frankly, probably know a little bit more about preserving the earth and moving things forward and being sustainable. So I just felt like I need to get that off my chest. Sorry.
Thank you, Coral. Around the world, we've got tens of millions of people being displaced every year by climate disasters of one sort or another. And so we have large numbers of climate refugees all over the world. And here in Flagstaff, what we're seeing is climate migrants, and, you know, privileged folks who can buy a second home when it gets too hot in central Arizona. I think that based on the temperature projections, we can expect more of that. And how might we move forward to plan for that?
I'll weigh in on that a little bit. We this last year approved a residential housing development over on 66 and Ponderosa. And one of the challenges is, as you mentioned, people buying second homes here in our community that then limits the supply of housing for the local community. And this was proposed by the local developer, and that developer actually lives right here in Flagstaff, who's doing this development on this residential housing. What he had proposed was in his HOA that there would be no short-term rentals in the HOA, meaning that people cannot rent their house up as a second house to rent out to earn money on that investment property. Yes, you can still rent a bedroom out to help pay the mortgage, but you cannot buy the residential unit and then make it as a side living. And so his proposal in that HOA was that there be no short-term rentals. I really like that concept. It was a concept, you know, I didn't think about before, is when a housing developer comes to Flagstaff, and usually people can develop by right, but there's also people can develop where they're asking the city for something. And in that, and with that something, there creates a development agreement. And in that development agreement, we have controls as a council body of the things that we would like to see. And I really like that HOA concept where in that HOA, they cannot do certain things. And one was that short-term rentals, for example. And so I'm learning from that, that going forward, when we have those type agreements where they need something from the city, I'd like to see more of that, that will create that housing environment that locals will be able to live in those homes instead of outside of the communities. You know, and there's nothing wrong, you know, having Airbnb, and there's nothing wrong with someone having a second home, of course, but when there's an opportunity where we can try to mitigate some of that as a council body, I would be in favor of that. So thank you.
Thank you, Charlie.
Stefan, I have to admit, I didn't understand I didn't fully get your question.
Sorry. So, you know, we've got a very expensive housing market here in Flagstaff.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the drivers for that are climate migrants, folks who have second homes. We can expect more such climate migrants in the near future,
Mm-hmm.
because Central Arizona is already getting to the point where it's so hot that people are starting to die as a result. So as those pressures mount, what can we do? I know there are some housing plans, and I wanted to give you all an opportunity to speak about that.
I'll give the county answer on this one. You know, yeah, a challenge. Another one of our challenges in the community, the housing element, obviously, and cost of living. You know, there are many colloquialisms, poverty with a view, all that kind of stuff. You know, it's hard to live in this community with the cost of living. And once we had our jurisdictional authority removed from us for short-term rentals, it modified the market. We're seeing a lot less long-term rentals. And it's not completely negative. I'm seeing people that didn't have much money that suddenly it provided an opportunity for them to make a little bit of money and help them improve their own social opportunity or economic opportunity. opportunity. So, you know, we wrestle with state mandates and what level of authority that we can have. More recently, we went through at the county level 2 different pieces. On the short-term rental, just quickly, you know, we're looking for tax equity, and you know, the mayor can speak to this on behalf of the council. And, you know, I worked on the legislative side on behalf of the Board of Supervisors. We were each proposing mechanisms that can help us address these issues and build a balance into it locally. Our primary piece was the taxing component. By default, you know, we're watching down in Sedona, you know, housing areas really being turned into hotel areas that they didn't have to go through the same regulatory pieces or health components that were needed for the sake of for what hotels have to go through. And a reason why is because the short-term visitation, but you have corporations coming in and buying residential properties. So here's talk about a social shift in economic shift. It really is pushing people further and further out. In the county, in our ordinances, most recently we had an update to our subdivision ordinance that built in incentives for density if people would bring, or developers would bring in affordable housing components into the subdivisions. So that was a piece that we took a look at. It will push a little bit of a challenge once implemented into, you know, somebody wants to move forward in traditional neighborhoods. It's a change, and people struggle with that change. But it is a tool that we build into the toolbox to help incentivize and help people with that. You know, I was going door to door out in the off of Highway 64, and what I found is, you know, by default, our affordable housing is getting further and further out, but then you have the cost of transportation that's impacting people. And so we definitely are struggling with it on what we can do with our ordinances and our tools. But the mayor did say it's not only a government solution. You know, I agree with Quarrel. Part of it is on the private side. Can we have, you know, good landlords out there that help build in incentives, build in affordable components? We need the mixture in our communities. And we could talk on this all day, but I'll pass the floor over as well.
I just want to weigh in from a city point of view. You know, short-term rentals has been one of our #1 policy issues with council for at least the last 2 or 3 years. I was the president or the chair of the GAMA, which is a Greater Arizona Mayors Association, has all the mayors from the Verde all the way up over to Lake Havasu, all the way down to Springerville now. And that is the #1 issue still of GAMA. I'm the past president, there's a new president. It's still our #1 issue. We talk about poverty with a view here in Flagstaff. I think it's only poverty with a view if you get a chance to look up, right? Most of us go to work in the morning, we don't get to look up, it's dark. We come home, we change clothes, we go to our second job, we get home when it's dark. We don't even get to see the view that everyone is talking about. And I think it's a problem, right? When you look at what's happening with the short-term rental issue, it's a local control issue. You know, Supervisor Ryan talked about the fact that people are circumventing zoning. They're putting in boutique hotels. They're destroying neighborhoods. So you might buy your house or be fortunate enough to buy your house in a neighborhood and then look up one day and realize that no one lives on that street but you. Where are your personal property rights? You thought you were buying a location that was going to be a neighborhood, that you're gonna be able to, you know, borrow something from across the fence, send your kids across the street to play. It's an issue. It circumvents our zoning. It does not put them on the same fields as hotels. They don't pay necessarily the same for trash. They don't pay the same property taxes. They don't pay a lot of those things. There's something called Proposition 207, which really negates a lot that we can do. And then you add on top of it, it's called SB 1350. This is a new sharing economy. And so the state has implemented this sharing economy bill. And the idea is that I'm sharing something. So like I have an Uber, I'm sharing my back seat. Well, the same should be applied to these short-term rentals. I have a house, I'm sharing a room. I'm still living there. I'm still overseeing this activity. I'm sharing my garage that's now been converted into a studio. That is not what's going on. You have Marriott, for example, a national hotel chain. And down in Phoenix, they bought a street. They're looking at a new model of how they do hotels. This is the reality of what's going on. Sedona, there is someone who has bought, I think it's 4 lots. And one of the houses that they're currently building has 8 master suites, 8 bedrooms, 8 master suites, a bunk room, and something else. That's not a house. No one's going to live there. And they have the ability to build 3 more of these. So again, I hate to be saying this, but it really comes down to who we're voting for and whether or not they think this is an issue and whether or not they want to change some of these laws that they have created to make this kind of stuff happen. There's a question about why don't we tax second homes? The fact of the matter is it's against the law for us in the state of Arizona to do that. We can't do that legally in the state of Arizona. Here in Flagstaff, it's estimated that 25% of our houses are second homes and another 25% of our houses are Airbnb. This is why it costs so much for everybody else to live here, because we have 75,000 people in our population and only 50% of the housing stock is really available for us. So it's a market-driven type of a situation. And what I've been
Mayor Evans, is that really? I just wanted to sit on that for a minute. The numbers you're getting are that half the homes in Flagstaff are second homes or VRBOs.
So the estimates that we have is 25% of the homes in Flagstaff are second homes. And then because the Airbnb market is fluid, it's estimated that up to 25% of those. So it goes between 10 to 15 to 20 to 25, kind of depends on the seasonality of it. Mm-hmm. So that is why we're short. We are short 6,000 housing units here in the city of Flagstaff. And that comes from our Econa study that was done, the 6,000 housing units that we're short. So it's a market-driven issue that we have going on. You know, what I've been telling people in the Southside neighborhood, because we've been hit. I live 3 blocks from NAU. I see stuff all the time. I've been telling people, you know what? Maybe we can't control government and what they do down yonder way. Maybe we can't control the city council and what we can and cannot do. The county doesn't really play into it, but we can control ourselves. I tell people, you need to stop selling your stuff to these developers. Like, you know, somebody will have passed away and died in my neighborhood, and literally 2 days later, there's a sign up and the house is for sale because their kids are just flipping the houses. I go, what you guys are doing is you're selling your legacy. A developer's coming in, they're tearing it down, and they're building either student housing or some apartment complex no one can live in or whatever they're doing. So some of this also comes down to who we are as people and what we value. So that's my new approach, is telling the people that live here, don't sell. I get a letter in the mail every day. I'm not even exaggerating, to sell my property. I've started getting texts now from people, a text message. Hey, we're in the market to buy a house. Would you like to sell your house? I think that's criminal, especially because it then goes back to the poverty issue. The people in this neighborhood have been historically impoverished. So a real quick story, I feel like I'm talking a lot, but you know, the house that is now a student housing complex, 1 street over, that individual, their family bought that house in the 70s for like, I think $7,000. They didn't have a lot of money. It was a lot of money for them to buy it. They passed away. The kids sold it for $80,000. $80,000. The developer tore it down, and before it was built, before it was all completed, he sold it for 1.2. Did you guys hear me? $7,000. That's what they bought it for. Scraped their money and got it in the 70s. The kid sold it when the person passed away for $80,000 to the developer. The developer, before he finished that building, sold that building for $1.2 million. So my issue with that was that those people should have gotten a lot more money. So that's something that the Southside Community Association have been looking at. We're like, okay, if people are going to sell their property and we're just going to sell the whole neighborhood, then we need to start educating people about what their property is actually worth, right? It might be a little rundown house, but it's worth a lot more than what you got for it. So this is just some perspectives, I guess, from this side of the fence.
Mayor Evans, Stefan, I'd like to add a couple more thoughts on this subject and kind of get us back to, you know, the climate change conversation a little bit. You know, I really appreciate everything you've shared with us, Mayor. Very important and very relevant. You and I have had a back and forth about this for a long time. I know you know where I'm coming from. But for the benefit of the rest of the group, you know, I'm not someone who believes that we're going to build our way out of this problem. In terms of affordable housing and solving climate change issues, more homes are just going to encourage more people from out of Flagstaff to move into Flagstaff. I'm not sure it's going to have a large impact on lowering housing prices for locals who are already here. My wife and myself are folks who, you know, Claire's family has lived in Flagstaff for the past 20 years. Claire's family has lived in Flagstaff for the past 20 years. When Dr. Pat Ellsworth started working with ITEP, and that was a long time ago. So we've had roots up here for quite a while. Her family is 5 generations deep in the Northern Arizona region in Prescott. And, you know, we were living in Tucson and kind of saw the writing on the wall. We saw the boom happening there. We saw buffalo grass taking over the Sonoran Desert. And I remember very clearly one night in late September being out at 9:30 p.m. at night so my little 5-year-old kid could do soccer practice. And I was sweating because it was still over 100 degrees. And we knew we needed to get out of that situation for a number of different reasons. And we ended up in Flagstaff. So we're early pioneers in terms of climate refugees and climate migrants. And, you know, the opportunity for folks to leave hotter, harsher regions and come to Flagstaff should be an equitable one. Folks who want to move here should be able to have that opportunity if it's available. But at the same time, I think there's tension there too. I don't think that we can support becoming the next big 1 million person population town. That's just not in the cards. So how do we deal with climate migrants and climate refugees and those things? You know, that's a question that we all have to grapple with. You know, geographically, Flagstaff is, I consider it at the epicenter of climate change. You know, the science indicates that the Southwest is the fastest warming part of the continent, and precipitation is also becoming more variable and less predictable across the Southwest. This is a region that's already subject to increasing droughts, intense droughts and storms. And, you know, we sit in the middle of a treasured ponderosa pine forest that is very quickly going to be converting into a chaparral landscape if we don't get the fire regime in check. And we know that as climate change progresses, we're going to be rapidly facing increasing risk from fires and floods, decreased snowpack, heightened drought, you know, disease vectors like mosquitoes bringing diseases to humans and livestock, and all these things. And meanwhile, we've got the problem of Flagstaff being the weekend playground for everybody in Phoenix and the Verde Valley, Las Vegas, and places larger and wider. So how do we absorb the pressure and the growth that we're going to experience while also maintaining our own personal character and protecting those who live here already and our marginalized communities that deserve to have a place here, as well as folks who can just run up here and escape the heat whenever they want to. You know, these are the questions of our times. And these are the questions that they're at the forefront of what Flagstaff needs to do in order to prepare for climate change, to grow smart, and to make sure that we're not losing our character and our identity as we welcome new people into town and as we grow as a community.
Thank you, Austin. So Eric Nolan is trying to push us to talk about the IPCC report, the special report that came out October 6th of 2018, which pointed out that we really need to drastically cut our emissions if we don't want to reach 1.5 or 2 degrees centigrade warming, which would raise the cost of our climate disasters globally to over $50 trillion. So I know that the Flagstaff Climate Action and Adaptation Plan has the goals for the municipality to be net zero by 2025 and for the entire city to be net zero by 2040. And recently, as the scientific community is pushing for, Flagstaff citizens have also been pushing for us to reach it by 2030. Y'all have, the County Board of Supervisors recently approved the 477 megawatt wind power plants at Chevron Butte. I know the city is planning stuff at Red Gap Ranch. Are those two enough? Where are we standing in terms of reaching that 2030 or 2040 goal of net zero? Is enough being built? I know that the Chevron Butte plant is going to bring us lots of jobs, pump millions of dollars into the local economy while it's being built. Anyway, is it enough though, energy-wise? Is it going to allow us to reach the goal of net zero?
I just want to mention, I apologize. I have to log off of this call and log on to another call. But we still have 4 council members, and we have Jenny Neiman, who's also on the call, who can also help answer the questions that we have. So I'm going to kick this over to council members Whelan, Salas, and Odegaard. And I apologize for having to bounce off to another call.
Thank you for being with us, Coral.
Yeah.
Yeah. Jenny, let me unmute you too so you can join the conversation here. All right, Jenny, you're with us. Introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. Good evening. Thanks for the conversation so far. My name is Jenny Neiman. I am the Climate and Energy Specialist within the City of Flagstaff Sustainability Section. So I work with a team of people to essentially advance the climate plan. We work on climate, energy issues, as well as my colleagues work on waste, food, open spaces, etc. So that's me. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. And so let me put that question to you too. Are the Chevron Butte wind power plant and the plans for Red Gap Ranch, are they enough to have the city reach net zero by 2025, or the municipality, or 2030 or 2040 for the entire city?
So it's a really good question. There are a couple different ways to define carbon neutrality. So it depends on, are we just talking about energy that is provided to the grid, right? That is what we use to power our buildings with electricity, right? That doesn't count the natural gas that we use in our buildings, or maybe the propane that we use in our buildings. Are we talking about carbon neutrality for absolutely everything, which would include our transportation systems, right? That would also include our consumption. And Dylan, my colleague, is on the line, but that would include the food we have, and are we getting that in a carbon neutral way? So carbon neutrality is a big conversation. The wind plant will absolutely help. Red Gap will absolutely help, but there's a lot that goes into that conversation. So the short answer is no. We have to work on every single one of our systems and every single element within those systems in order to actually get to a carbon neutral place.
So perhaps what you're saying is education is key.
Education is key, action is key, individual action is key, large scale community action is key. It's really got to be kind of an all of the above, and got to really come into all of our different decisions.
Would any of the other council members and supervisors care to contribute to that?
You know, what I'd like to add is just the good news that we're not alone in thinking about this and trying to be bold. I like to think of Flagstaff as an innovative place. I like to think of us as showing leadership and sustainability, and I think we can continue to do that. But we're not doing it in a vacuum, and we're not sticking our necks out like geese on a chopping block either. You know, there's a lot of industries and corporations in different governments of different sizes worldwide that are planning for carbon neutrality. It doesn't go far enough, but it's a growing movement, and it includes some of the most economically powerful entities on the planet. I remember a recent Forbes list that includes companies working on carbon neutrality like Coca-Cola, Toyota, even Monsanto, American Airlines, Disney, The list goes on and on. You know, even APS has recently made a change of direction with a new plan that is a great start, and hopefully it's something we can work with and embolden even further. You know, one of my favorite stories is Microsoft seems to be going all in. They've announced a goal of going carbon negative by 2030. And additionally, to remove by 2050 the equivalent of all the carbon they've ever emitted into the atmosphere, either directly or indirectly through their consumption of electricity since their founding in 1975. And so what we're doing, what we need to do is not being done in a vacuum, and how it becomes easier to act. I'll wrap up really quickly. You know, it's easier to act when in important new ways when a lot of other people are doing it also. And we're going to hit that moment as we are with social distancing, where you see everybody else doing it, and it's no longer a risk to your own sort of sensibilities to go ahead and play along. And we're early in this still, and we are showing leadership, but there's going to come a moment when, you know, you're looking a little bit weird and out of place if you're not engaging in these types of conversations and bold goal. And once we get there, I think that's when we're going to see a tipping point, and that's going to be a good moment.
Well, and I want to thank you all for having done things like passing the Flagstaff Climate Action and Adaptation Plan, declaring a climate emergency, approving a 477 megawatt wind power plant. These are big steps in the right direction. Now, I know that there are hard decisions to make in implementing those things, but I just want to assure you that many of the citizens in Flagstaff are behind y'all. And we're not just here to celebrate lightheartedly, we're here to back y'all up. So, you know, like when we had 268 folks show up to the Flagstaff City Council meeting on January 28th, we're hoping once we do get back together in physical space to keep on showing that kind of support for the right actions. So thank you all very much for your leadership. I guess I'd like to end on a more celebratory note, since this is the cyber celebration for Earth Day. So I really want to thank you all for the good work that you've done so far, and let you know that as you guys show that leadership, we're behind you with everything we got.
Cheers.
So cheers, everybody. Thanks very much for joining in. I want to point out too that we did a series of interviews with the Flagstaff City Council members, the mayor, and the County Board of Supervisors, in which they shared their visions for Flagstaff and Northern Arizona. And that's also on the same page. There's a link where you can see their statements, and many of them have really contributed solid statements there. So I urge you all to take a look at that as well. Again, thank everybody for joining in tonight.
Thank you for the opportunity. Really appreciate it.
And happy Earth Day, everybody.
That's right. Happy Earth Day. And everybody help us out and let's work on this. We can do it.
Thank you, everyone. Happy Earth Day.